if you don't do anything about it, if you don't act on it, they'll just continue to do it. Every tech monopoly, when they get to monopolistic critical mass scale, they take advantage of the producer first and then the consumer. Producers in this case are the advertisers. You need to start to regulate the tech monopolies individually, right? Each one of these businesses is so unique, they're so big, they're so different. This lawsuit that was actually filed by the Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton a few weeks ago, going after Google and Facebook. And this is about this thing called Jedi. And so basically the gist of it is a secret agreement between Google and Facebook. It basically said that Google saw Facebook's rising dominance in digital advertising. Google and Facebook at the time of this agreement were about 60% of the collective digital advertising market between the both of them. And what Google basically said is, hey, we see all these other competitors coming in here, Snapchat and Amazon and, other digital advertising competitors. So Facebook, if you don't integrate with these other competitors in the digital advertising world, right? All these people want to make software integrations into Facebook to help cross-pollinate ads and do these different ad marketplaces and, all these different ad tools. They said, hey, don't do that. Don't integrate with them. We, Google, we will allow Facebook advertisers to get preferential treatment in the Google ad network, right? So we're going to give your Facebook advertising program some special sauce. But in order to do this, we don't want you to integrate with basically Google's competitors, their other competitors. Facebook was much smaller than they are now. But this was only a few years ago. This wasn't 10 years ago. So Facebook still had a considerable advertising business, which has continued to grow. And they did it. And they've found the documents actually showing that this was all true. And they had their lawyers, set these agreements up in such a way so that, they knew there was antitrust concern with this, but they still did it anyway. And I think that's the really interesting thing. My interview on Maria Bartiromo's show the other day, talking about the fact that these tech CEOs actually, have lost control over their ability to rein in content censorship and abusing their users' data. And I went much deeper into that on last episode. I don't need to rehash it all, but this is just another sign to show that in the face of these businesses being completely unchecked, the amount of weight that they throw around, when these kinds of partnerships come together, if you don't do anything about it, if you don't act on it, they'll just continue to do it, right? I'll do more, I'll do worse. They just will continue to push the limits until they see where the limits are. And we've seen that on content censorship. We've seen that on data abuse. Everyone talks about how it's such a big issue or this or that, and then there's no actual penalties. There's no actually limits created. There's no actual pushback. And then, the inmates run the asylum, basically. And that's what you have going on here. You just have such gross lack of internal controls at these companies when it comes to something like content censorship and, kicking creators off of YouTube or demonetizing websites from Google search or, kicking creators off of Facebook because they're talking about stuff that the platform doesn't agree with. It's supposed to be, not a publisher, it's supposed to be an open exchange of information and ideas, right? That's the whole premise of platform. But then you have the leadership at these companies negotiating these kinds of deals. This wasn't like middle-level managers. That's what I was talking about on the interview, that the mid-level managers are completely run amok, and Sundar at Google and Zuckerberg at Facebook, just they can't rein in all these powers that they've given to mid-level managers. There's thousands of these people running all over the place. this is at the senior level. This deal doesn't go down without it being known at the absolute top of the organization. It's easy to show that they have monopolistic power in digital advertising. Now, the key to this lawsuit, just like the key to what the EU is doing, what Poland just announced, to be able to fine Facebook and Google if they kick off creators. They can fine them up to $2 million for each violation. If they don't, if they kick off a creator that violates Poland's free speech laws, they can tell Facebook or Google to reinstate that user's permissions. And then if they don't, they can fine them $2 million. What will probably happen is Google and Facebook will do less obvious things than banning people outright. They'll, shadow ban them, or they'll mute the virality of their posts, and there's a lot of gray matter. So if Facebook and Google want to play dirty, they can play all day. But anyway, steps in the right direction, right? Now what you're doing is you're forcing Facebook and Google to actively and willingly subvert the intention and the will and the laws and of these countries. EU is going after, has discussed its strategy. They haven't brought any cases yet, but they've discussed the strategy to say that these tech monopolies are using data to take advantage of producers, whether it's sellers on Amazon, content creators on Facebook and Google. Similarly here, the case is looking not at the consumer. Right? What does the consumer care if Project Jedi exists? The consumer, the one receiving the ads, right? It doesn't hurt the consumer. Every tech monopoly, when they get to monopolistic critical mass scale, they take advantage of the producer first and then the consumer, but very rarely the consumer. They want to keep the consumer happy. They take advantage of the suppliers, of the producers. The producers in this case are the advertisers. So by doing this, what they're doing is saying, hey, advertisers, we are killing off competition, right? We're killing off other avenues which you could be spending your ad dollars on, or you could be using to deploy your ad dollars on other exchanges, right? But by us kind of co-opting Facebook's digital advertising audience, we're going to have this combined entity. That combined entity, Project Jedi, is not going to integrate with any of these third-party competitors or tools, which is then putting the producers, the advertisers, at a disadvantage. Okay. You have clear monopolistic power in terms of just scale and control of the digital advertising market, right? So that's the first kind of checkbox for antitrust violations. And the second checkbox is, did they take advantage of a customer? This is where everyone's been getting hung up. They need to say that the producer, the advertiser, is the customer of Facebook and Google. And it makes sense, right? Who is paying Facebook and Google money like a customer would? The advertiser is, right? Facebook and Google are getting paid by advertisers. Advertisers equal customers. And Facebook and Google are actively working together to put their producers, their customers, at a disadvantage, and ultimately being able to drive up prices on advertising and reduce the options that they have for other avenues to spend their ad budgets. That's the case. Well, we'll see if that's how they go after the case, but that's how I would go after the case. I think that's how the EU is thinking of going after the case. I think that's, what Poland, they don't have a case, but they're just now making laws and making rules. This is the justice minister in Poland. We'll see how Ken has done it, but you've had now over 10 different U.S. states sign on to this antitrust motion led by Texas. And I think it wins. I think it wins if they play it right. If they go after the consumer, I think they get defocused and you confuse the court, you confuse yourself, and Facebook and Google, then, they're just going to pick away at that consumer thread. And if they can get that thing going, then the wheels start to come off. But if you can keep this focused just on customer equals advertiser, advertiser disadvantaged by Project Jedi, should be a win. But we'll see. Either way, it's going to take a long time. The DOJ case against Google, which is a joke of a case, horrible case anyway. The trial date is set for 2023. So, what these companies, obviously, they're all in Platt. What is the threat to their stock market in the near term? Their stock price? There's really none. There's so much more that needs to happen to actually see these things through before you even see if they're playing out the case correctly. Does the case have teeth? On the surface of it should. But then you got to get it now you got to get a lot more tactical with it to really say, okay, well, even if they played all their cards right, and let's say in 5 years the ruling comes down, or you're getting close to a ruling, because you got to do discovery, and then you have the hearing, and then you can appeal it 5 different times, and each side will appeal it, and then you got to go up through the court. It's going to take forever. It's good that they're doing it, because if you didn't do it and you didn't have any checks and balances in place, then they would just keep doing worse stuff. But it's going to take a long time. Where will it end up? Are Google and Facebook going to get broken up over this? I don't think so. I don't think this breaks them up. What you need to do, yes, you need to have fines. What the FTC, the FCC, we got multiple agencies here that could do this. You need to start to regulate the tech monopolies individually, right? Each one of these businesses is so unique. They're so big. They're so different. Each one of these tech monopolies needs custom guidelines and regulation, which helps regulate their operations as a business. Each one of them have different business models. Yes, they're all platforms. But we've got 8 different platform business models in the book. They've got, each of them has multiple business models just in the United States, let alone globally. You got so many people. So you can't just expect to regulate all of them with, one big ruling. But you can go in and you can start to put in protections for producers, right? Whether that's content creators on Google and Facebook, or it's also advertisers on Google and Facebook. Both of those are effectively a form of a producer to the platform. So that's really where, if you can start to first and foremost protect producers as it relates to each one of these tech monopolies, they all have different types of producer bases. YouTube has different producers than Google search. Facebook has different producers on Facebook versus Instagram versus WhatsApp versus like 10 other things that they have. So you got to start looking at these things individually. Maybe it leads to that. And if it does lead to that, again, I actually think that's a good thing. Net for Platt, it'll actually be a good thing because it will help make a more competitive landscape and playing field, which ultimately is good and creates more value rather than having all the value concentrated amongst a handful of companies, which is, where we've been trending now for a number of years. Hi, this is Alex from Winner Take All. Thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the content. Feel free to leave a comment, ask us questions, and definitely make sure to join us on our next live stream.